our webinar. We're really excited for the conversation that we're going to be having today. So let's go ahead and kick off with introductions. So hi, everyone. My name is Bridget Moran. I'm our content manager here at CourseDog, so really focused on all things research and content related. Very excited for this discussion today, but I will hand it over to our other two panelists now to introduce themselves, starting with Mara.
Thanks, Bridget. Hi, everyone. I am Mara Koval. I've been with CourseDog around 4 years now, and most recently have been a full-time product manager for our course demand projections module. Have been lucky enough to work with Winthrop University and Tim on our implementation there. So we'll go ahead and hand it over to Tim.
Good afternoon. I'm Tim Dreeke. I'm the assistant provost at Winthrop University, where I'm responsible for curriculum program support. In particular, one of the things we work on is how we've handled our course scheduling and improving all of our processes regarding scheduling and course offerings.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tim. All right, great. Well, before we dive into things, I want to provide a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So first off, we're going to begin by looking at some of the pressures that institutions are facing and how some of those pressures are really calling for better data and analytics, particularly when it comes to that scheduling piece. Then we'll go ahead and take a look at, what are some of those metrics and sources that can really be used to inform scheduling analytics. And then finally, we'll take a look at how scheduling analytics can really help you and your institution optimize your course schedule and make it student-centric. So throughout this presentation, Mara and I are going to be kind of handing it back and forth, but we will also be asking Tim to weigh in and share his experiences and how he's seen this play out at his institution. So definitely really looking forward to that part of the conversation. We'll also go ahead and make sure to leave time for questions at the end of this session. If you do have any questions that come up during the presentation portion, feel free to go ahead and drop those in the Q&A portion. And if we see them in the moment, we'll hopefully get to them. But if not, we will have that dedicated time at the end where we'll be able to get to those. We'll also be conducting a few polls throughout today's session. So really looking forward to getting everyone's perspective on this topic and learn about how you're approaching scheduling and analytics at your institution. And then one final note that I always like to share, I know we always get this question. Yes, we will be sharing a recording of today's presentation and the slides. So you will have access to that at the end if you want to reference that. All right, wonderful. Well, now that we have all of those logistics out of the way, let's go ahead and get into things. So as I just mentioned, we're going to start off by talking about some of the newer urgencies when it comes to creating the class schedule. We'll talk about, some of the challenges that come with some of those historical scheduling processes and how they impact both students and institutions. So as part of our jobs, Mara and I spend a lot of time talking to folks across higher ed about their scheduling practices and the pain points that they experience. And I highlighted just a few of the themes that we hear on this slide. And, these are coming from conversations with institutions of all shapes and sizes. And one of the common themes that really jumps out across the comments we've heard is, oftentimes our current scheduling practices aren't really working for students. And it might be we don't have enough courses or sections available for students, or perhaps those, oh, I'm sorry, my cat ran across the keyboard there. So it's always something new here during remote work. All right. Well, as I was saying, a couple of themes jump out at us, and this might be, there are overlapping course times. Maybe students don't know how to find the courses they need. And this is really just a small sampling of what we hear. And I know that these problems here certainly aren't unique to all of us on the line right now. So if our scheduling inputs aren't always accurate, how does this actually impact students? On this slide here, you'll see that we've highlighted some common student complaints and what that means when our schedules aren't aligned with student needs. So it might be that students say, hey, all of these courses, they're offered at the same time. I have to take both Bio 101 and Chem 101, but they are both offered at the same time, and that's going to be really tough for me. Or perhaps our students are caretakers or they have jobs and they have other responsibilities in their lives that they have to work around the course schedule. You'll see here at the bottom of the slide, we actually recently conducted a survey of College Pulse, and it found that 1 in 3 first-year students would consider leaving their institution if they can't access the classes they need. This is pretty huge. And when you dig into those survey results even more, it found that 1 in 5 students would consider leaving their institution overall if they can't access the classes they need. So we'd love to hear about how this is playing out at your institution. So we're going to go ahead and launch our first poll question here. So I think it just popped up on the screen here. So we'll leave it open for about 30 to 45 seconds. So please go ahead and choose your response here. All right, great. So we're getting a great response here. Okay, so it looks like we have stopped the poll here and we can all see the results here. So it looks like the top result here was class is not offered at a time that works for the student schedule. Yep, I think that makes a lot of sense here. And that could mean, maybe a student, like I mentioned on this slide, they have a job, they have caretaking responsibilities, or maybe they're a student athlete. Maybe they have something else that is competing with our schedule. So I think that really resonates with a lot of institutions. Mara, any thoughts here? Do you want to jump in here? Anything sticking out to you?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we see really often as we're working with different institutions. I mean, it's pretty typical for an institution to just roll their schedule term over term, and that can result in a course being offered every fall at the same time, and that might not work with student schedules, or even a course that is necessary for a specific student's requirements in their program not being rolled into that new schedule. So there are many different reasons that we see, which I'd love to talk about with our next slide here. So let's take a look at what the data says now. Overall, the majority of students experience challenges trying to enroll in the classes they need, and this is something that anecdotally we hear about a ton. As I mentioned previously, 6 out of 10 students said that they frequently or somewhat frequently experienced issues as they're trying to enroll in the classes that they need to meet either their major or general studies requirements to stay on track to graduating. However, only 11% of students said that they never experienced issues trying to enroll in the classes that they need. You'll see that results vary slightly between students at 2- and 4-year institutions. However, overall, students most frequently encountered issues when a class was already full or a class was not offered at a time that worked for their schedule. So this suggests that the schedule isn't always built with students' needs at the forefront, which can mean several different things. So if 3 in 5 students find that classes are already full when they're trying to enroll, this suggests a problem with overfilled sections where there aren't enough seats to meet student demand. And this can happen for a couple of different reasons. Maybe you don't have enough instructional resources, or maybe you don't have access to the right data to determine that student demand. Other barriers students encountered included the class was offered at the same time as another class they needed to take, or the class was not offered during the term that they were trying to take it in. Students aren't the only ones that feel the effect of poorly optimized course schedules. Institutions also feel the pressures, especially in terms of resources and resource optimization. If a large part of the schedule is made up of underfilled sections, this takes up a disproportionate amount of instructional resources that could be allocated to higher demand sections. So in the same vein, the combination of resources needed to maintain low demand sections, along with additional resources needed for areas of high growth, can lead to a rising cost per student. And finally, for those areas with growing demand, it can be difficult to find the space and resources to keep up. Tim, you and I have talked about how the course schedule is strongly tied to efficient resource allocation and student outcomes quite frequently in our implementation. This isn't always apparent at first glance, though. How do you make the case to other higher ed leaders about why they should care about the course schedule?
Certainly one of the largest expenses on any campus is the faculty cost, the cost of the instructional faculty. And being able to manage that in a way that's efficient, both getting what the students need and teaching only what is absolutely necessary, and with the courses that are needed to meet the students' requirements is essential. Over the last few years, we've been having challenges with lower budgets or tighter budgets, enrollment pressures, and being able to efficiently build a schedule and efficiently offer what the students need in the time that the students need it is essential to be able to keep a balanced budget.
Absolutely. That's something that we've heard a lot from our other institutions as well, and totally understand how student-centric scheduling absolutely helps to benefit the institution with regards to graduation rates, and then also that resource optimization. So appreciate that perspective. So for our next section, I want to take a look at what exactly we mean by scheduling analytics. We'll take a look at some of the historical data sources that can inform analytics, as well as some of the more forward-looking sources, such as data from degree audits and program maps. There's so much data we can use to help us build a schedule that puts student needs first. We've listed out a few more metrics here. First, course distribution throughout the day and week. I'm sure you've all experienced pain points here. Classes are packed between 10 and 2, and faculty may be reluctant to teach outside of these hours, even if this is when students need to take their courses. I was talking with one administrator, and she told me that a student working in her office told her that she couldn't work on Tuesday and Thursday. And when she asked why, the student said that all the classes they needed to take were only offered on Tuesday and Thursday, and that they were jam-packed in classes all day long. Course distribution is also important in the context of program maps. For example, if a student signs up for a program with the expectation that they will take classes at night, all of the courses need to be offered at night as they progress. They shouldn't complete 2 terms and then only find out as they attempt to register for the 3rd term that none of the classes they need are offered at night or during the times that they need them. Course and section fill rates is another important metric to examine. Particularly in popular GE courses or milestone courses, institutions should look to see if all of the sections offered are consistently at capacity. This may be an indication that not all students are able to access these courses when they need to. I won't go over each individual data point here, but the questions listed on the slide are a good starting point to see if students can indeed access all the courses that they need as they progress. So while all of the data points we listed on the previous slide are great, historically, there's always been a bit of guesswork when it comes to creating the course schedule. A study we conducted with ACRAO last year found that faculty availability and faculty preference were the top 2 factors. Using these factors to create the course schedule means the schedule is more centered on faculty needs than on student needs. Additionally, looking at data from previous term schedules gives an incomplete picture of how student demand may be changing or how it may not have ever been met. More forward-looking data, such as degree audit data, can help institutions see into the future and assess which courses students still need to take. It can also help scheduling teams see which courses are critical for a student to complete their program versus which courses may have some wiggle room for scheduling.
Awesome. Thanks, Mara. Well, we're going to go ahead and get into our next poll question here. Mara was just talking about, how valuable degree audit data can be. So would love to hear from everyone on the line now about whether you all are using it in your course scheduling process. All right, looks like we have some great responses coming in here. And it looks like we have the poll results up here on the screen. So pretty interesting distribution here. Just over half of folks on the line say that they are not using degree audit data. About 1 in 5 are, and then a pretty good portion also unsure about this. So pretty interesting, and I think this is actually good because we're going to be getting into this a bit more later in the presentation. So hopefully lots to learn here. But Mara, would love any thoughts that you have here.
Yeah, I'm not super surprised by this. I think it's pretty at parity with what we're seeing when we're talking with a lot of the institutions that we work with to implement course demand projections. It's pretty typical for institutions to leverage historical enrollment data, but audit data is less commonly used when it can really be very beneficial because it actually reflects the students that are active on your campus, what classes they've taken historically, and then what they're going to need in the future to stay on track. So it can provide some hidden insights that historical data trends don't necessarily offer. So I know we're going to talk a little bit about that here.
Absolutely. And Mara, I'd be curious to get your perspective on here. For the folks that said, they're unsure if their institution is using degree audit data, who is kind of the person at the institution that it would make sense for them to talk to about this, if they were curious to find out that answer?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say probably the university registrar or the department schedulers and chairs, those that are involved in adjusting enrollment capacities of sections and actually doing the course planning process. So what courses are going to be offered each term and how many sections of the course. I'd say if that data is being leveraged, it should be informing that process. And so those that are actually owning those scheduling adjustments should be aware of whether or not it's something that is being leveraged.
Great. That's super helpful. Awesome. Well, let's take a moment now to take a closer look at some of those forward-looking scheduling sources. So as we were just talking about degree audit data, I think this is a really great data source because you can see where your students are at in real time. So you can see, first of all, which requirements your students have already met, and then which courses they've taken to meet those requirements. And I think perhaps even more importantly, degree audit data allows institutions to see which requirements students still need to meet, and therefore which classes they're likely to register for in the future. And of course, I think that this all sounds great in theory, but I think, similar to what we just saw in our poll results, an ACRO survey that was conducted recently found that about only 1 in 3 undergraduate institutions has a significant or modest analytic strategy when it comes to degree audit data. So I think that that's pretty in line with what we just saw in those poll results that we did there. I'd also like to take a second to talk about program map data and what that means. So looking at past course sequences of graduated students can help institutions infer what their program maps might look like. Based on students that have previously enrolled in any given program, this allows institutions to see which courses and then also in what sequence these successful students have taken these courses. This isn't just helpful for creating program maps, but also for informing the course schedule. It gives institutions a better idea of which courses students are likely to take in future terms to meet requirements, and also can give a good idea of what term a student is likely to take that course. So I think one of the interesting things about degree audit data is that sometimes it can show that students might actually be taking different course sequences than we'd expect them to be taking. And Tim, I know you and I have talked about this a little bit, but how have you seen this manifest on your campus? What types of programs do you find that it can be a little more challenging to predict those course sequences for?
Certainly, we have students entering into programs from many different directions, whether they come in as a new freshman with transfer credit, or transfer students. They all coming in with and coming and entering at different points in time. Some programs are very structured and they're very easy to plan out. Programs that are in design and fine arts or even in teacher ed, a very established sequence that goes from your first year to your fourth year. Others, Bachelor of Arts degrees in, say, history or psychology or sociology, have a lot of flexibility. You can take things in sort of whatever order you want as long as you get everything done. And so those both create different types of challenges as you're trying to predict where students are going to be. Degree audit data is great for saying, okay, what have they done and what do they have left? Program maps are great for those very structured programs where you can see exactly how we would expect them to go through the process. And so we'd be able to use both in this process, both looking at what they have taken and what they have left, and then using that to infer what they need to take in the near future.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that, Tim. All right. Well, let's get to our next section here, and then after that, we'll move into the Q&A. I know we've had a couple of folks, type some questions in here already, so thank you for that. We will definitely make sure to get to those soon. And if anyone has any other questions as we continue the presentation, please feel free to drop those in the Q&A function. All right, great. Well, for our final section, we're going to be taking a look at some of the more practical applications when it comes to scheduling analytics. So we'll walk through identifying conflicts in the schedule to make sure that those requirements that are frequently taken the same term aren't scheduled at the same time. We'll also take a look at how to determine when certain courses should be offered. And then finally, we'll return to scheduling data and analytics and how that really ties into program maps and how we can help build those in a way that is promoting those successful student outcomes. Course conflicts can manifest themselves in a number of different ways, but ultimately, I think it really comes down to two classes that a student needs to take are scheduled at the same time. And obviously, this is bound to happen with some courses, and it may not always be a problem. Perhaps it's an optional elective or a course that has many sections offered. However, course conflicts can be a pretty big problem in other cases. For example, prereq courses schedule at the same time that a student must take to progress with their degree. This can also be a problem for courses that are offered across multiple disciplines, but students from a variety of programs must take. For example, the science department and the math department might create their schedules independently, but accidentally schedule, that Bio 101, that Calc 101 in the same time slot. And while this might be fine if there was no overlap between their student populations, students from multiple programs sometimes have to complete both of those same requirements. And I know this can be particularly challenging for smaller institutions who may only offer one section of Keys courses, so students don't have a bunch of different time slots to choose from. Course conflicts can also pose a challenge for gateway courses that aren't offered every term. So in this case, the stakes are even higher for students because they can't just wait until the next term to take the course. While I'm sure that we're probably all aware that course conflicts definitely are a thing, definitely a challenge, the data does show that they have a real impact on students. That College Pulse survey that we referenced early in the presentation found that 2 in 5 students struggle to enroll in a class they need because it's offered at the same time as another course they need. So I think this is definitely a problem that most institutions deal with. And Tim, I know you and I have talked about this. This is something you've encountered. So I would love to hear your perspective. How do you go about identifying and addressing course conflicts in the schedule at Winthrop?
Bridget, yeah, this has always been a challenge. And when prior to adding a software solution to help us with this, it was we really relied on those department chairs to talk with each other, and the biology department, the chemistry department, the math department, to talk about who's putting what where. A lot of times we'll have for our advanced students in those areas, there might be one option as an incoming freshman. Sometimes we would rely on, once advising starts and students start looking at the class schedule, they would start reaching out to the chairs and say, hey, do you realize you've overlapped these classes by a half hour, or they're in the exact same time slot. So it's always been a challenge, but having a tool that can help us with that has been a great help.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that. Well, I want to go ahead and move on to our next post question here. So in a similar vein, I would love to hear about how all of you on the line are going about and trying to identify those conflicts in your schedule. All right, great. The responses are rolling in here, and it looks like we just shared out those results, so everyone should be able to see here. Pretty interesting spread here. If I have to guess, folks are probably using kind of multiple of these methods called out here. But it looks like the one that rose to the top here is manual review, which, yep, that makes sense. If you don't have a specific tool that helps you identify that, someone in the registrar's office, maybe your department schedulers, they're, really having to almost go line by line through that schedule. And, some of that includes talking with other departments to compare schedules. And then it looks like lesser so, folks relying maybe on tools, running reports. Yeah, I see we have a couple of folks who put other here. If you want to go ahead and kind of drop those answers into the Q&A, I can look at those. But this is pretty interesting. Maura, any thoughts here?
Yeah, I'd say this definitely also aligns with a lot of what we've seen as well. A lot of that scheduling process involves going over spreadsheets and comparing data to, of course, understand if or assume if anyone on the call, if that's your job. I empathize. I know it's a lot of work, and it's a very important work to make sure that we don't create those conflicts for students. But this is definitely a spread that we see quite often when we work with new partners.
Great. Thanks, Maura. Okay, let me just close this poll out of my screen here. Great. Well, as we just talked about, I think there are really a number of different ways of preventing course conflicts. But with that being said, some methods are more effective than others. So on the left here, we highlighted what it looks like to go through the schedule and a manual process. And I think almost half of folks on the line said that they relied on this process. So at a high level, when we're looking at manual scheduling, each department, might create their schedule independently. And of course, they're probably talking to colleagues in other departments, but there's no way for them to immediately see what other departments are scheduling. So after they've finished creating their schedule, they then go ahead and send it to a scheduling clerk or maybe someone in the registrar's office to go ahead and enter that schedule into the SIS. And depending on the size of the institution and the number of sections scheduled, it could take, 3 to 5 weeks or maybe even longer to enter all of that information into the SIS. And once everything is entered in there, departments can then go ahead and see, what courses may conflict and go through a revision process, which, can then take several more weeks. And this isn't only time consuming, but also relies on that manual review, those running of reports to go through the schedule and identify those conflicts. So it can definitely be challenging. But on the right side of the slide, you'll see here that using a platform can often help bring that transparency to the scheduling process. So departments are still entering that scheduling information themselves, but they're entering it directly into a platform. And during this process, they have the ability to see what other departments are also scheduling in real time. So rather than waiting for a month-long lag of that manual entry, they can go ahead and actually see, those conflicts and talk with their colleagues to find that right solution. So definitely, I think a lot of benefits there to consider.
And I know many institutions list out courses in the order that they need to be taken for a program. So while this is helpful, navigating the sequence of courses can be tricky when the courses aren't offered every term. So as we mentioned in the previous slide, particularly at smaller institutions, a course may not be offered every term. Administrators need to consider this when creating the course schedule and think about how students will be able to access courses that may not be offered in the term that they would be expecting to take them. Of course, we have to think about course timing for students that stay on the prescribed path for their program, but it gets more interesting when thinking about students that may not be on that traditional quote unquote path for whatever reason. So maybe a student had to take a step away from their studies for a term and now they're out of sync with the prescribed path they had been looking at from their advisor or that they were reviewing in the catalog when they first joined the institution. So more and more often, students are now coming in with prior credits. This might be from high school AP courses, dual enrollment credits, or maybe an associate's degree from the local community college. These prior credits often mean that students are taking some of their required courses earlier than students who came in without any credits. So like many institutions, Tim, you mentioned that Winthrop is seeing an increasing number of students coming in with prior credits. How does this impact course sequencing and planning for which courses you're trying to offer each term?
Now, that's been an interesting challenge over the last several years. We have had students historically would come in with maybe 1 or 2 or 3 classes they earn through AP or dual enrollment, but we're now seeing freshmen, brand new high school graduates coming in with a full associate's degree that they've earned concurrently. We're increasing our transfer pathways with the local community college to give our students more options and more flexibility. That does create some challenges in that they're bringing in half of what they would have taken in that first year or two. And so that it is a bigger challenge. And so we need to look at what have they done and what do they have left and where do they need to go to try to help the students and help build a schedule that then is helps students progress towards the degree efficiently.
Absolutely. So I want to close out today by talking about how student audit data can help build successful program maps. Looking at student audit and success data, institutions can gain insight into what successful program maps might look like. This data looks at the historical degree audit data of students who successfully completed the program. And this helps administrators build program maps that take into account considerations such as which courses are most popular for students to take to meet a given requirement, which sequences of courses are most likely to lead to success, when milestone courses should be taken, and which courses should be taken together in a given term. On the flip side, it's also beneficial to analyze the schedules of students that did not successfully complete the program or transfer to another program. This helps administrators understand where students are more likely to struggle. This could include courses where students frequently struggle, course combinations with poor success metrics, and where students are most likely to stop out of a program. Building these program maps predicated on successful completions doesn't just give students a helpful roadmap, it also helps schedulers understand what courses and how many sections they should offer each term to meet the needs of students following these paths. So with all of that being said, I want to quickly cover how CourseDog can help your institution create a student-centric schedule. CourseDog empowers academic administrators to support on-time completions and operational excellence with integrated academic and event scheduling, course demand projections, curriculum management, and online catalog solutions through a single bidirectional integration with your SIS. Our system is highly configurable, enabling institutions to support their unique business processes while implementing best practices. And our newest product, Academic Operations Analytics, gets to the heart of our mission. Scheduling analytics uncovers hidden insights for institutions and ensures that the number of seats and sections offered align with student demand. It also makes guided recommendations around when to offer the sections to avoid scheduling conflicts that could impact a student's degree progress. Curriculum analytics helps institutions to build clear pathways and make decisions that ensures their curriculum is financially sustainable.
All right, thanks for that, Mara. Well, I think we can go ahead and get to the Q&A portion of today's session now. I know we already have several questions submitted here, so I'll go ahead and start reading those out. But if you do have any other questions, please feel free to go ahead and drop them in here. So it looks like we have a couple of questions that might be more relevant for Tim and then some for Mara. So I'll start off with Tim, a couple of questions here. This person is curious to know, do you have a central scheduling office at Winthrop, or do you have each department do that individually?
We had a central scheduling office when this was all being done manually. With the implementation of CourseDog, we did loosen it out to allow the departments and the department schedulers to go ahead and handle that themselves. We have brought a part-time person back to help with sort of the transition and to help with solving some of the cross-departmental problems. So the answer is yes. we had hoped that we'd not be able to need a full-time person in that role, and we probably don't, but having now someone part-time in that role has been a great help because it also allows them to troubleshoot and answer questions that our schedulers have.
Definitely, that makes a lot of sense. I'm seeing another question here about the role of advisors in the scheduling process. So I'd love to hear, Tim, kind of your thoughts on this, and then also Mara, what you've kind of seen across the different institutions we work with.
Sure. We do require advising for all of our students. And so advisors are very involved in not necessarily the scheduling, but certainly in the advising process. And but we also get feedback from the advisors when our students are not being successful in finding the courses they need. Most of our advisors are faculty. We have a handful of professional advisors, but most are faculty. And so they are constantly in contact with their department chairs and making adjustments on the schedule. And as one advantage to the system is that we can make an adjustment immediately. It takes effect immediately. Doesn't have to take 3 or 4 days to go through a central scheduling person to make those changes or adjustments.
And then from my perspective as well, totally aligned with what Tim has shared. I think from advising perspective as it relates to helping to support student-centric scheduling, really what we recommend is as much as possible having those defined program maps and sharing those with students. It really does, I think, help to, one, create that demand, and so it's easier to predict the supply if you do have that central loop of sharing that program map to the catalog, sharing it with students in an advising format, and then subsequently being able to incorporate that data into the course planning process. But I do think planning is extremely important, particularly as it relates to non-traditional learners and first-gen college students. I think it's something that's really helpful and integral to the scheduling process to help them navigate through their degree pathway.
Absolutely. Great. Well, I'm seeing another question here. I think this person kind of got to the heart of one of the slides we were discussing, but they said, I would be interested in how schools successfully coordinate course demand for courses that are required by students from different departments, like math, English, biology. And Tim, I know you spoke about this a little bit in one of our discussion questions, but any additional thoughts to add there about how you approach that?
Yeah, that historically was always our biggest challenge, but we really relied on those department chairs talking with each other, and they still do, and they still need to have that communication between the three of them. But the nice thing about knowing what courses students take typically in the same semester together, the analytics tool will actually show us through heat maps, where's the other department intending to offer the class, or where is it scheduled currently, so we can move it off onto another time slot and avoid those overlaps that are there. It does require that communication. It does require some sharing, and or it requires a dean above them to say you're going to play nice. So.
Mm-hmm. And I'd say with course demand projections, I mean, absolutely, the goal really is to aggregate demand across programs. And so when we have access to student audit data, we're able to see across programs, so not program specific, like what courses meet different requirements in different programs, and are able to aggregate that to predict demand across the entire student body, as opposed to in a silo for specific programs. And so really the goal is to, once again, like provide as much data and information as possible to the scheduler so that they can make data informed decisions. And part of that is going to be looking at demand across programs to help manipulate enrollment caps.
Yeah, if we know that 6 programs require calculus, we know how many students are in those programs, who has and hasn't taken them, and then we can then say, okay, we need to have, if there's 5 students in each program, there's 6 programs, we need to have 30 seats available. We can then look to plan for that, and that's one large section as opposed to needing 3 sections or something like that.
Definitely. Well, I'm seeing a couple of questions here that are a bit more course dog specific. So I'll direct these to Mara, since she's kind of our product expert on the line. So we had someone here, they asked they'd be curious to know if any other institutions are using Workday. And, of course, we can't speak for the other folks on the line, but I know that, we at Course Dog do work with folks who use Workday as their SIS. But Mara, wanted to see if you had any other thoughts there that you'd like to add.
Yeah, so that's correct. So we do work with a number of institutions on course demand projections as well that do leverage Workday. So we do have that integration. Absolutely, if you'd want more information on it, can share information there.
Okay, great. And then in a similar vein, we have someone asking if we integrate with Colleague as well.
Yes. So I'd say we do integrate with Colleague. We do have a link on our website as well that provides more context on all of our integrations. And then if you are interested, once again, in getting more SIS specific information, we can provide that, but we do have a number of Colleague customers and do integrate with Colleague for CDP and our other platforms.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Mara. All right, next question here. Does CourseDog Analytics rely on individual plans being completed by students in DegreeWorks or another degree audit tool?
Yes, this is great. So we do not integrate with individual student plans. The reason being is that after talking to a lot of institutions, determined that it wasn't as reliable of a data source because many institutions don't or aren't able to enforce to have students keep this up to date. And so we do integrate directly with that degree audit system. So we're looking at specifically what courses have they what courses have been applied. So what requirements have students already met based on how that's been coded in your audit system. And then we're looking at program maps that your institution has. And we work with building those out in CourseDog. Or if your institution doesn't want to rely on your actual program maps or might not have actual program maps, then we do have an inferred map generator. So we are able to use that historical degree audit data to generate those pathways based on what we've seen students historically do as they progress through their degrees.
Makes a lot of sense. I'm seeing a question from Betty here, and they're asking which department typically oversees the implementation of this type of scheduling tool. So maybe Tim, you can speak to your experience, and Mara, if you want to chime in about what you kind of more generally see with our other partners.
So yeah, for both the scheduling and the analytics, it was a pretty heavy lift for our the registrar's office, our registrar or associate registrar for scheduling, and myself, and then the same group. We did that in phase 1, and then the analytics was a phase 2 implementation. And but that was for us. Then we involved some of the handful of schedulers from the colleges and the departments at the appropriate time for their input and assistance in user testing.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty spot on with what we typically see. I think it really just depends on if your institution follows centralized or decentralized scheduling. Centralized being a lot of the scheduling processes are contained within a specific office. Decentralized is that they're distributed across departments. And so we absolutely can provide or do provide our partners with an overview of the expected workload and functions that we would need, tools and resources that we would need provided from your team, areas of expertise from your team in order to support the implementation and keep us moving forward. But most often what we see is that it's going to be within that registrar's office, and they'll be responsible for helping us to spread that information to the various end users on campus, which are most often those department schedulers, department chairs, deans, et cetera.
Great. We had a couple more general scheduling questions coming here, so I'll direct these to both Tim and Mara here. But Nicole is asking, how do you schedule science and other labs that are, typically about 3 hours long, but only once per week within scheduling blocks?
I can go ahead and take a stab there. And then Tim, if you want to add anything, feel free to dive in and jump in as well. So the way that it works in CourseDog is that you do set up standard meeting patterns, and on the actual meeting patterns, which are just a day and time combination, you're able to associate different filters. And so you can say only sections that are labs are able to access these, so that when your department schedulers are going in and they're assigning a meeting pattern to that or a time and day to that section, they're able to just pull up dynamically those predefined blocks that are available and permissible for that section and that criterion. For our partners that leverage course demand projections, I think Tim mentioned it earlier, but we do have the concept of a time conflict heat map, which provides specific recommendations based on the goal of reducing conflicts in the student schedule. Because we're predicting demand for a future facing term, we're essentially predicting, and we are predicting for every single student in that audit system that we're running through the calculations, predicting a full course load for them. And so we know theoretically what they're going to be taking and are making recommendations to distribute those specific classes out to increase the likelihood that a student will be able to enroll all of the classes that they need and won't run into those conflicts where it's class they need is offered at the same time as another class that they need. And so in addition to having those predefined meeting patterns, we're also going to make recommendations across your meeting patterns around when those specific sections should be offered in order to reduce the likelihood of time conflicts.
Spot on.
Cool. Great. I'm seeing a question here about guided pathways, and I know different institutions use different terminology here, but they'd be curious to know about, how do we help kind of reduce the impact of scheduling when it comes to this?
Guided pathways, program maps can be very helpful in sort of establishing that standard expectation across, and it gives us a great starting point for where we think the student needs to be. And if we know we've got a number of students who are following a very structured guided pathway, that can be very easy to get into the system and be able to use it and help us with those scheduling options.
Absolutely.
Great. So I'm seeing a product specific question here, so I'll give this one to Mara, but this person's curious if the curriculum analytics tool is built into the scheduling platform or if it's a separate tool.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the course demand projections module, which is curriculum analytics, that's making the recommendations around what classes should be offered, how many sections, and at what times. So it is a separate module, but we really have the goal of helping to support change management. So making it as easy as possible for your schedulers and those that are going to be actually leveraging the insights to schedule to reference them in their existing scheduling flow. So while it is a separate module, we also surface those insights directly in scheduling so that you're able to view a lot of the recommendations and leverage that rule enforcement to help support that student-centric scheduling and implementation of the recommendations. So separate module, but we provide a lot of opportunity to surface it directly in scheduling, and all of that is configurable so that you can make the determination around what you want surfaced and how you want it enforced.
Great. Another good scheduling question I'm seeing here. This individual is asking, how far are you able to plan out the schedule, and how far out do you typically see other colleges are planning their schedule? And this individual said they're currently finalizing classes that students begin to enroll on Monday.
Yeah, I'd say this definitely differs across institutions that we work with, but overall, institutions always have the goal of wanting to finalize it as far ahead as possible, which of course is different than what we see in practice a lot of times. Some institutions will plan around a full academic year out, and many institutions will plan, let's say many of the schools that we're actually working with right now on demand projections are finalizing their spring 24 schedules around right now, but that's not to say that there aren't going to be some of those last minute adjustments as you move things around, as if faculty things change, if a student needs change, things like that. So we definitely partner with the schools that we work with to kind of think about like, how can you leverage some of the optimizations that you're obtaining as a result of leveraging CourseDog in order to help meet your goals if they are to schedule farther out. But absolutely, it's not unusual that we see last minute changes happening. And we do provide insights into an enrollment dashboard so that it's easier to make those last minute adjustments in response to real-time enrollment.
And like the questioner, we're wrapping up spring scheduling right now with advising to start next week and registration in 2 weeks. So
Great. All right. Well, looks like we have just a couple more questions here to get answered. Thank you so much, everyone who submitted a question. This has been really great engagement. But we have a question from Matthew here, and they're asking, what metrics are you using to determine if your schedule changes are effective? So I'll let Mara kick off this one.
Yeah, definitely. So I'd say a lot of that is just going to be tracking things in hindsight around what actual enrollment numbers end up looking like. And so comparing enrollment ratios year over year in response to actually implementing a lot of the suggestions and schedule changes that are going to be student centric. And so we do help our partners with measuring, one, what is the ratio of changes that have been made? And then two, also like, how do we see that compare as we actually watch enrollment windows happen and students enroll? How do we see that improve things for the better? Ideally, you would have higher fill ratios.
Tim, anything you'd like to add there about how you measure the effectiveness of your schedule at Winthrop?
Yeah, so this is going to be our first schedule with the analytics tool with it. So it's going to be, as Mara said, we'll see in January how the enrollment predictions are matching up and how those are going. We've been live with the scheduling piece for a little over a year, and right now it's the ability to be quickly responsive to student needs, make adjustments on the fly has been a tremendous help, that we don't have to wait 2 weeks for something to get from one person to another, or even just 2 hours sometimes can make a difference for students on that. So the success on the scheduling tool itself, I think for us is the satisfaction of the schedulers themselves and their happiness with using the product. So.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, I think those are about all of the questions. Oh, it looks like we might have a couple more that actually just came in here. So yes, please, if you have any other questions, please feel free to drop them in here. I think this is actually maybe more of a comment here, but someone added that they are looking at the number of students in their schedule that are doing the add drop, number of sections with 0 enrollment, what those sections are, et cetera. And that can be helpful for looking at the effectiveness of their course schedule. So thank you for adding that in. All right, and then we have one final question here from Betty. I think this is probably directed at Tim. She is curious to know if you've seen an increase in your enrollment or completion rates.
I think for me, it's a little early to tell. Ask me in about 8 months.
Yes, very fair. Don't want to get ahead of ourselves by any means.
And I'd also like to add that this also, once again, very closely related to our mission, is a metric that we are very interested in at CourseDog as well, and want to closely monitor. So ideally, if the idea is that if you're going to be supporting student-centric scheduling, you're going to see that directly impact student outcomes positively. And so we are planning to work with our partners on tracking this as well, and are very excited to see the outcomes.
Absolutely. Well, that was really great engagement from everyone on the line. So thank you for that. I think we can probably go ahead and wrap up a couple minutes early, give everyone a few minutes in their day back. We do have just one final poll question here, just a quick yes or no before we all hop off, just kind of for our own internal knowledge. So we can go ahead and launch this final one, and then I think we can have everyone go on their way, hopefully have a chance to maybe take a quick walk, get a snack before your next meeting. But thank you so much, everyone who has joined us today on the line. Thank you, Tim. I think this has been a really great discussion. Really enjoyed all of the questions that we saw come in from you all. So I think we can go ahead and wrap up, but thank you again, and thank you to Tim and Mara for helping with this whole entire discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.